What proof do you have that you really died? Well, that's an easy one to answer. When I died, I had stage 2 cancer. When I came back, it was gone. No discussions. Do you know how much energy it took to die? This was kind of a big deal. They don't answer questions. She just looked at me and she goes, "Hi, you're back." Okay. And I did find another oncologist, and she did a comprehensive biopsy. She said, not only is there not one cell of cancer present, but your flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect. I wouldn't believe you ever had cancer had I not seen the original test from the original doctor.
I want to thank you again on the top. Since this is where we're starting the episode, guys. We've already been talking for 5 minutes, but I want to thank you for the 12th time for being here. And I'm looking forward for my audience to hear, your story that wraps again with grief and a near-death experience, because that's essentially a big part of the podcast, is exploring spiritually and talking about grief and loss, and you've experienced both. So please tell me how grief and this near-death experience come together in your life.
That's a great question. Boy, that's a complicated question.
Hell yeah. I want to make it as complicated as possible.
Golly, I embrace simplicity. There's a story that Henry David Thoreau wrote a letter to Ralph Waldo Emerson and said, "Simplify, simplify, simplify." And Emerson wrote him back and said, "I think one simplify would have been enough."
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I like to dumb down life. I agree. I'm with that simplistic approach. I think life is simple on paper. It can be like written out as like simply, and this like how we should live our life, quote unquote. I could be diverse, but I like to ask questions as complicated as possible, just to confuse my guests, obviously.
Well, it's very effective. Okay, well, let's have to go together. I guess one of the interesting things I've learned is I went to Grief Share, which is this church-based grief recovery thing, right after my husband's tragic death, and they say there is no hierarchy of loss. I disagree, because I was sitting next to this guy who was he's probably my age or whatever, and he had lost his mother in her 80s to a natural, aging process. And I remember thinking, I lost my mom to a natural aging process. She was my soulmate, my best friend, and that hurt a lot. I mean, I'd still mourn the loss of my mama, but having your husband shoot himself in the head at your home, that's a whole different level of trauma. And I think I think we tend to oversimplify dealing with grief. There is a hierarchy. Somebody who's lost somebody to suicide is going to be very different than somebody who loses somebody to old age, and not to belittle that. I mean, I know how bad that hurts to lose a beloved parent, but anyway, that's something I've encountered, and yet in my position, my husband came home for lunch one day and ended his life at our home, and he used a gun, and it's very messy, and I mean, I lost my mind. I just went away. I just, it's too much, broke me. But comparing, we have to kind of figure out how to realize that's a very different loss than perhaps a natural death. And we don't, because I remember very distinctly within days of my husband's death, one of his coworkers showed up at the front door and said, I don't remember the words, but basically they said, "I'm here to console you." I was like, okay, give it a shot. And they said, "We know what you're going through. We just took grandma off the ventilator last week." And I wanted to say, are you effing kidding me?
Yep.
You get back with me when your spouse, your significant other, your person goes away tragically. And I guess I just wish, if I were queen of the world, and hopefully it shouldn't be long now, I would insist that we handle people differently. We appreciate if somebody's lost a child or a significant other to suicide, there's so many extra layers. I mean, the guilt alone. The Bible talks about the serpent beguiled Eve, and the guile and guilt have the same root word. So it's a darkness. It's a black hole of emotional energy that can just pull you right straight to hell, which it did me. And for 2.5 years, 29 months to be precise, after his suicide, I had 3 prayers every night, and they were more than prayers. They were really affirmations. But I asked God, heal me or let me die. Because I knew I was going down. I knew I wouldn't be around long. And secondly, when I die, spare me the life review. I did not want to see me going through this process, see my children dealing. I have 3 daughters, see my 3 adult daughters dealing with an insane mother. And then my other prayer was no more hard decisions. At one point, decision fatigue does not begin to define it. At one point, it's kind of brilliant on one hand, but I bought an array of white polo shirts and blue jeans, all the same. So in the morning, I could just open this closet, pull out my polo shirt and put on my blue jeans, and I was dressed. No decisions. Didn't have to decide between pink and yellow and purple, just white shirt and blue jeans. And that served me pretty well. But those were my 3 prayers. In fact, I had a financial advisor take me aside, and she said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about making some investments and blah, blah, blah." And she said, "Where do you see yourself in 2 years?" And I said, "Oh, I'll be dead. I'm not going to survive this." Yeah. And she was like, "That's not very hopeful." And I was like, "Well, you want facts?" But yeah.
Well, first of all, there's a lot to tap into right there, but the multiple outfit is phenomenal. I grew up with like Nickelodeon and those cartoons. Like Doug was a popular show, and then every time all those cartoons to open the closet, it was always the exact same outfit. So I'm like, talk about simplifying life. I wear the same. I wear white tees all the time. But I have like 12 of these. So I'm like, man, I just wear white tees every day. What's the difference? Why do I got to think about it? Okay, well, you're still here.
I am.
You didn't die, so thank you for that.
Yeah, their days. People are like, "You must be so grateful to have survived this near-death experience. You must be so grateful." And in the depths of this, I mean, so yeah, it was 29 months out that I had a little, boo-boo at the hospital and went to another realm and had a big time over there. But people will say, "Oh, you must be so grateful to be back." And I'm like, no. And after I came back from this, I was Googling NDE plus depression, and it's a real thing.
Yeah, I've heard
And I
that.
even read a book about it, that when you come back from this, you're like, whoa, the other realm is great. I saw so much stuff. I've grown spiritually, blah, 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 blah. And then after the dust settles and you run around telling all your friends that you glimpsed heaven and talked to spiritual beings and had this great transformative experience, and you realize their response is, "Hey, could you grab that ketchup from the other table for me? I'm really hungry." You know, they do not want to hear it. I mean, they really don't. And they think you're crazy as a bed bug. And
Yeah.
I've had so many people write me. I mean, I get over 20 emails a day. And I read them all, and I always send them a little blessing and some positive energy and ask God to bless them and keep them safe. But I can't begin to respond to them. But I hear the same comments again and again and again. Uh, people people want to know, one, is it legit? Did I really die? And was it really that much peace? And was it really that great? And the answer is yes. And what's so funny, I get these naysayers, and they're like, "I'm going to ask her a question that proves she's not telling the truth." And I think they all ask the same 3 questions, all of them. They're like, "You think you're so smart? You're asking the same thing the last 29 people asked." But what I was going to say, I get a lot of people saying, "I had an NDE too, but I didn't have the nerve to tell anybody." I get that a lot. And I didn't fully understand it until I came back from this experience. I shared it with several church folks, and they were incredulous and unhappy. I shared it with some family members, and they were beyond incredulous and asked me to stop talking about it. So I really understand how people just get shut down. And there's more than a few mornings that I wake up at 3:30 in the morning and I think, why did I write that book? I must have been smoking something good to think that was a good idea, because I get so much criticism. I mean, it's overwhelmingly positive and encouraging comments, but boy, do I get a lot of criticism. And if you look at my reviews at Amazon, the number one thing I get 1 star for, I know these people aren't even reading the book, but the number one thing I get 1 star for: God is not a woman. I refer to God as she. I use a feminine pronoun. And I explain in the book, my dad was extremely unpleasant. When I was 14, he basically went out for a pack of smokes and never came back. That will mess you up. And then, I mean, I knew where he was, and I went and said, "Hey, Dad, you left home and you didn't take me with you." And he said, "Just stay away from me. Just don't come around anymore." So when I think of God as Father, it makes my blood run cold. It really does. When I think of God as Mother, I feel very comforted. But people can't wrap their minds around that. People really bristle at the idea of God as she. And yet, here's the other thing. Before this NDE I had in 2019, I had read just about every book I could get my hands on about NDEs. And then I had my own. And it was very different from what I had read in the books. The other thing I hear all the time is, "You're doing it for the money. You're doing it for the money." You know what? Be a writer for about 5 years and then tell me you're in it for the money. We're the original starving artist. But it would have been a lot easier to keep my mouth shut, just go on my way, live my life, do my thing. So yeah, I understand why people stay quiet about it. It is by far the easier path.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like even again, I haven't had your experience, so I can't relate in any way. I'm only the one listening. But when I've had other people share their stories, and again, I go back to the comments because that's my glimpse into see how people are maybe getting some sort of idea how they're coming at you. It is overwhelmingly positive as well, but I feel like the negativity just tends to stand out more. You know what I mean? Especially even if it is
It
90 10
does.
or 95 5, that 5%, that 1% really sticks out more. Like, look at the news. Everything's like negativity sells kind of shit. And so it's like when you see that, it really opens the door. And I always wonder, I've mentioned this recently. I feel like, and I'm curious what you think, when people don't believe it, that's fine. Like, whatever, believe what you want to believe. I think it's just the way you approach it when you're talking about someone else and their beliefs. I wonder if they don't believe it's possible, this, that, or the other, based on their beliefs or based whatever happened in their life, is it a fear because they might be wrong and they're leaning onto their beliefs as a safety mechanism? You know what I mean? Like they feel safe because I believe this is what's going to happen, or I believe in God, X, Y, Z. And then once
Yeah.
someone says something that's opposing to their beliefs, it's like an attack on them and their beliefs, which is like they identify with their beliefs and their ideologies and whatnot. So it becomes personal attack, and they just can't respond to the idea of something else happening. So I just wonder if that's why people get so aggressive with it, or maybe they're just bored and they don't like their job and unhappy with their life. I don't know. Maybe it's a whole other thing. But I think it is fascinating. That's why I'm curious again about your experience about that. First of all, that I'm going all over the place. That depression aspect is interesting too, and that makes sense to me because if that other side is as magnificent as you're saying, coming back to someone asking for ketchup, just like, oh my God, I'm talking to this idiot right now, and I just experienced that. So it's like I can see where I can't understand it from an experiential standpoint, but I see where you're coming at. So can you tell me about?
But
Sorry, go
yeah,
on.
what I was going to say along that line, I think one of the things that makes my experience unique, as you said, it was a big, big, messy thing to have my husband. And I really love the man. I mean, I adored him. I prayed for him every day, indefatigably, faithfully, persistently. And to have this happen in the midst of that was very beyond hard. That doesn't begin to describe it. But it's 29 months out, I was diagnosed with cancer, and it was stage 2, which means it's already spread around a little bit. And I went in for a biopsy, and lady parts biopsy, and the the surgeon made a little boo boo. And when I woke up from this thing, I told the attending nurse, I said, "Listen, something's going wrong. I'm bleeding a lot." And they said, "Oh no, once you get home and lie down, you'll be fine." I was like, I'm 59 years old. I've had this particular, earth suit for 59 years. I think I know when something's gone awry. And she said, "No, no, no." Anyway, 3 times I declared that something was wrong. 3 times she said, "Just go home, lie down, you'll be fine." Well, I got home, and it went from bad to worse. And I ended up actually, a little aside, I was standing in my shower because I had this beautiful white wall to wall carpet in my house. And when you're bleeding to death, housekeeping is of paramount interest. I didn't want anything to happen to my carpet. So I went and stood in my tiled shower so I wouldn't mess up the carpet. Because, if I'm going to be dead, I don't want to leave a mess for somebody else to clean up.
Fair.
And so I'm standing in the shower, and I realized, somebody had told me a Bible verse early on, way back right after my husband's death. It's 1 Corinthians 10:13, and it says, "God will show you a way out." And as I'm standing in my shower and just bleeding a lot, I thought, this is my way out. I didn't do this to myself. I actually sought medical help. They screwed me up. They sent me home. And now I'm in a shower. All I got to do is sit down. It's over. I've asked God every day, heal me or let me die. And I'm getting shown the way out. I thought, this is great. And I was going to sit on the floor of the shower, because I figured once I sat down, I was already getting pretty weak. I figured that'd be it. And nobody could say anything except how sad. So, but I was actually getting ready to sit down, and I thought, there are so many people who put so much energy, effort, money, everything into keeping me alive. Is it really fair for me to take the easy way out? I used to tell my daughters, I used to say, the right thing is often not the easy thing. Often the right thing is the hard path. And I was like, oh, crap. So I did. I stepped out of the shower and I went. My friends were in the living room and I said, call 911. I'm bleeding to death. And they did. And they took me to another little ER. And at this little ER near my home, they pretty much just, gave me some chemicals that just greased the skids to the afterlife. It wasn't like I wasn't on that path fast enough. They gave me a morphine derivative, which is a very bad idea. I've given a handful of these talks live, and I mean, like, to a live audience. And I can always tell the medical professionals in the audience, because when I say, and then they gave me a pretty good hit of Dilaudid, which is the morphine derivative, all medical professionals go,
oh man,
because morphine depresses respiration and heartbeat, which is what it did. I mean, here I've been bleeding for some time. And then they gave me that, and man, boom, I was out of there. My friend who sat with me as I lost consciousness, he said, he looked up at, the nurse and the doctor had left the little cubicle there and left me, I guess, just to go on to heaven. I don't know. And my friend said he was watching the blood pressure cuff, which was one of those automated things. And he said he looked up at one point and it was 32 over 25, which is for all purposes dead. And he said the next thing, he was getting up to go get the nurse. He said, the next thing, I put my hands up. I mean, he said, you woke up, you open your eyes, you put your hands up like you were reaching up to somebody only you could see. And there's a term for it. It's called terminal lucidity, that at the end of life, there's this burst of energy. And I wasn't able to sit up, but I put my hands up, and he said, you actually wiggled your fingers like you were waiting, almost like a child waiting for a parent to pick them up. And he said, I said something that he did not hear. But meanwhile, the last thing I remember was thinking, those are some good drugs, and then boom, I was gone. And the next thing I remember is I am being awakened from a deep dreamless state, being catapulted out of my body. I mean, I've used the analogy like toast out of a toaster. Man, it was very dramatic, right on the cusp of being a little scary, but it wasn't. And I knew instantly, my mother used to tell me this funny story. She used to say, what if you die so fast that you don't even know you died? And you're just kind of wandering around thinking, what happened here? No one's talking to me anymore. This, you know, you're dead, because I was in a whole new realm. I was in a whole new place, but I knew instantly what had happened. And I really was catapulted out of that body, and I was floating away from my body, and it was in blackness. I couldn't see what was happening, but I knew I was floating away from that body further and further. And one of the first things that happened was I thought, I'm dying. And then as a lifelong editor and writer, I corrected myself immediately and said, actually, you're not dying, you're dead. And it cracked me up. And because I'm really funny.
clearly, come on.
So I laughed, and I heard my funny little giggle, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Everything I really am went with me, from my macabre sense of humor to my observance of the world around me, of my, being a grammar fool and not having to correct my own grammar as I'm dying or dead. I just thought it was so cool to hear my laugh. And several people said, well, you were talking telepathically and you didn't realize it. I was, no, I was talking like I talked to my dog, hey, what'd you like for breakfast this morning? Brown kibble? Okay. I mean, I was talking to myself like I talk all the time. I chatter away to myself, I used to be to the dog, to the trees, talk to everything, to the flowers. I like flowers. So I was definitely talking. And I thought it was pretty interesting that the mechanism by which sound is produced and heard was on that gurney. And yet, in this new experience, not only could I hear my voice and make sound, but as we were talking about earlier, I had a background in broadcasting, and I know what my voice sounds like, and I sounded just the same. And I thought, how fascinating is this? That I sound the same, I think the same, my sense of humor is the same. And then in short order, shortly after this, because I'm still floating further and further away, and I think it's great. I really, truly, people think this is a joke. It's not. I really felt like I'd been released early for good behavior. I feel like I'd gotten my get out of jail free card because I had not done this in the shower. I had not succumbed to the temptation to just, oh, well, I had sought out emergent care. I had been in an ER. I mean, it took two nurses and two doctors to, send me to my reward, but they did it.
They finally got there.
They got me there. It took a little effort. But I remember thinking, this cracked me up too. I thought I was supposed to start chemo and radiation the next week. And I thought that has ceased to be a problem. And I really felt very grateful that I was out of that. And the other thing I remember is I had a bunch of bills I was going to pay when I got back from the hospital. And I thought, not my problem. That's somebody else's problem. And it's interesting how much awareness I had of that life and what was happening and what was going to happen next. And I did not have a life review, but I remembered my house to the front steps, to the front porch, had very, very steep steps. And the firemen could not get the gurney up these steep steps and around a tight corner into the house. And so they just, basically grabbed me on one side and helped me down the steps. And I remember in this after death experience, I did not have a life review, but I remembered and I thought about how much love they had shown me. Just some stranger, they're called to my house. They can't get the gurney to work. I mean, they can't get it to go up the stairs. And yet they wanted me to live. And not only did they want me to live, they were very invested in making sure I stayed alive. So as I'm thinking about all this new experience, I remember thinking about just the raw love in those simple acts of being on duty, responding to the call, helping me out to the ambulance. And then as the ambulance made its way to the hospital, one of the firemen, it was a rescue, a volunteer rescue, he just stayed right with me, held my hand, and he kept saying, Rosemary, you're going to be okay. Rosemary, you're going to be okay. And I thought, just what an act of love. So I was thinking about that stuff as I'm still floating away from my body. And early on in this experience, I felt this massive spiritual presence join me. On my left, much taller than me. And I knew someone had come into my experience. Floating away, I feel this presence. And I'm thinking, oh, this is great. This is so cool. And I remember I turned my head to the left and looked up, thinking, I'm turning my head to the left and looking over my left shoulder. So I have something of not a physical form, but some remnant of the human form I had for 59 years. But I looked up and I looked at him or her, and I said, literally with a lilt in my voice, I said, and who are you? And the answer, before I could even finish the sentence, the question, the answer was immediate. The answer was, you are the image and likeness. I'm the original. I thought, wow, that's Genesis 1:26. I thought my whole life I tried to figure out what it meant to be made in the image and likeness of God. And I've thought about that almost every day since this happened 6 years ago. There's an original. I'm just the image and likeness. And there's an original. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. And then I'm continuing to float. And then these spiritual beings join me. And we're chatting away. And, I've often said, I mean, this is the fact. There's an old African American spiritual, this world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. And that has felt like my song. I have never felt in love with life. I've never felt like I really fit in here. Even as a kid in elementary school, I just didn't fit in junior high. I'm like, who fits in junior high? And then high school and the rest, I just never fit in. I fit in when I was being embraced really by these spiritual beings in this next world. And if I could summarize the whole experience in 3 words, it'd actually be pretty simple, but it would be that these beings were so happy to see me. And it was like they were saying, welcome home, dearie. I know that was a tough one, but we're so proud of you. We're so happy to see you. You did a good job. That was a lot of tough stuff you went through there. And that was so great. I felt like my whole life I've wandered this earth trying to find my people and my tribe. That was my tribe. For me, when you find a new friend and you're so hopeful that it's going to work out and you want to spend time with them and they get to know you and you get to know them, it's so hard to form those kind of friendships that have really strong bonds that survive the years. I struggle with it. So it was just so wonderful to be surrounded by people who got me. They really understood me. And then this just went on and on. Um, One of the things that was revealed to me was as I was floating in this blackness, I said to one of the beings that was with me, I said, I've been here before. Like in this 59 years, this is very familiar to me. This triggers a memory. And one of the spiritual beings said, you remember your mom told you a story that when you were a baby, an infant, a newborn, in fact, you were given up for dead by the hospital. And they said, you didn't almost die. You came over here then, and we sent you back. And I was like, well, that explains a lot about my weirdness, about being the one that can hear the angels talk and being the one that sees things other people don't see and always feeling like such an oddball. And also the passion for reading about the NDE accounts. I think Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, came out as a little trade paperback. I think it was in 76. But I know that I bought it as soon as I had the money, and I read that thing over and over and over again, just fascinated by these NDE accounts. And I was like, well, that would have been good to know 59 years ago, but doesn't matter now, does it?
You're already here.
So, yeah, I mean, all right, well, and the other thing about this experience that I share with people, when I died and I'm, floating away and all that, it really was akin to waking up from a very intense dream and realizing, well, I got wound up pretty tight over all that mess and it wasn't that big a deal. And I thought, not only was it not that big a deal, but it's already fading. It's already so far back there. And, throughout this experience, I heard somebody screaming, and I mean screaming, Rosemary, 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 over and over again. But what's so fascinating to me, the more the experience went on, the softer that voice got. And at the time, I didn't even interpret that it was Rosemary being screamed. It was like the buzz of an annoying alarm clock because I never had one thought of turning around. And do you know, I was just reading that paramedics now recognize that calling somebody's name when they're trying to rouse them from a NDE or when trying to resuscitate them, it is not effective. So now they say things like, your children still need you. Isn't that fascinating?
That is interesting.
Because it wasn't just me, it's others that you're already detached from that name in a split second. And, the word personality comes from the Latin word for mask. So when we shed that persona, in the next life, that whole picture's gone. The Rosemary, the writer, the editor, the husband did this, and all the other messy stuff. It's gone. It's gone just in a second. So it's very much like waking from an intense dream. So somewhere in the experience, I mean, I think of it as chronological, but my favorite Einstein quote, gosh, he was a cool guy. My favorite Einstein quotes, said, to those of us who are committed physicists, the past, present, and future are only illusion, however persistent. So in our linear construct, we like to say, well, the past happened here, and now we're in the present, and then the future's up here. So I think of this construct as very linear, that, I'm floating away from the body, and then I encounter the spiritual being, and then it's told that I had this before, and blah, blah, blah. I don't know that that's the sequence. It feels like it, but I don't really know. So as this experience went on, at some point, I was no longer floating away from my body, but I was in a white room. And I don't remember the transition. And I feel very confident that somewhere there was some stuff that happened between the floating in the blackness and being in the white room. And it sounds goofy, but I think it was like, okay, she's going to have this experience, but she's not going to remember it. I got to remember the floating in the white room. But anyway, I'm in the white room. I'm on my feet now. I'm not floating. I'm standing on something approximating legs. I remember thinking, I wish I'd looked down, but I didn't. I was like, what have I got down there? But I didn't. But I was in this white room. There was a mist falling around. There's a door in front of me. And I knew that door was the way out. I knew that door was the ticket. And as I remember thinking, always the writer, but I remember thinking, I don't know if I have feet or legs or what, but I know that if I have an intention, I can perambulate to that door. And I did at best possible speed because I had not one thought of going back. I just kept saying over and over again, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful this is over. My prayers have been answered. I'm so grateful this is over. 59 years was, 5 years too many. I'm just so grateful. So I'm going toward this door, and a spiritual being, maybe more than one, was talking to me. And I couldn't see them, but I could hear them very clearly. And there's this mist falling. It's like a pea soup fog. And this mist is falling all around me, but it's active and it's swirling a little bit and encompassing me. And I said to one of the spiritual beings, I said, I feel like I ought to be able to focus on an individual droplet of this mist around me, which if you're ever in a fog again, and I've done this in a fog, think, can I focus on one droplet? It's crazy talk, but it seemed like I should be able to. And what the angel told me, she said, your eyes have not acclimated to the spiritual experience yet, but these are not droplets of vapor. They're particles of light, and you're being cleansed because everyone who comes to heaven has to be cleansed of the muck of earth. And that's how it was explained to me. I thought muck was a fun word because it's not a word I've ever used in everyday conversation. But I thought, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And it was explained to me that some people get so enmeshed in believing a disease process or a mental illness is part of their identity that has to be cleansed away from them, that's not part of their identity. And something that was conveyed to me, and I don't know that it was conveyed is all I can say, but if I agreed to go back, which I was like, no, but if I agreed to go back, I'd be restored to wholeness. And it wasn't you'll be healed, but you'll be restored to wholeness because my grief had been so deep from the loss of my husband. So I get to this door, and I was like, yeah, that's great to know. Good. I'm going through the door. And I get to this door that is now, I knew it was a line of demarcation between this, the last of this experience and on to the next. And I paused. I had my right hand up to push through the door, pretty intrigued by the fact right-handed on earth, right-handed in heaven. So I'm using my right hand to do this. And I paused and I asked the being that was with me, I said, is this the divine will for my life? The medical mistake sends me on. And the answer, again, before I could even finish the sentence or the question, because all I got out is this the divine? And the answer was immediate. It's no. But whatever you decide, you go with all of God's blessings and mercy and grace and care and love. And I realize now, it took me a while to realize this, but that was an answer to my third prayer, no more hard decisions. So whatever I decided, I was going to be richly blessed. I thought, okay, I'll take that deal. I want out. And as I, again, reached to move through that door, I was given an image. An image is not a strong enough word. It's like I saw a potential future event. I was in the room watching this potential future event of the nurse who had consoled me before I lost consciousness. And I said, am I going to die? Or I said, please don't let me die, something like that. And she said, oh, honey, we have many solutions for this. We're not going to let you die. Well, I saw that same nurse in this vision, and we were in a hospital supply room, and she was sitting on a little stainless steel stool. And she was leaning forward, had her head in her hands and sobbing uncontrollably. And she said, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die, and I lost her. I was like, oh, come on. She's my age. She's lost a few people. She'll get over it. Because I got to go. I have to get out of here. And then I turned my attention back to the door, but then I wasn't just looking at this nurse. I felt her pain. I felt that deep, pressing, agonal grief. And I knew that pain. That was the same pain I'd had after my husband's suicide, because my husband did leave behind a message that was not kind before he ended his life. And I thought, if I can spare one person that much pain, I have to go back. And I put my right hand down at my side, and that's the last thing I remember. I mean, and there was no backwards whoosh. There was not any sound. I was back on that gurney in that little ER, although they put me in a better room. Apparently, if you really want to get somebody's attention, have your heart stop. That'll bring them in. So I was back on that gurney in a second. Yeah.
Thank you for that tip. If I pulled anything from this episode, that's what I'm gonna do.
Well, you could call it a life hack, but I think it's more of a death hack. I don't
death
know.
life hack, not die hack. I don't know, whatever you want to say.
So, yeah, I was back on that gurney in a second. And, I opened my eyes and I'm like, what? I do remember thinking Robert's Rules of Order, you have a first, a second, and then you have a discussion before you vote on it. We hadn't gotten past the first. I thought we were going to have a little discussion phase of this question of what should I go? Should I go back? Should I go? Should I go back? And I saw this angel, just a being of light in the upper left-hand corner of this little ER cubicle. Although I was in a bigger room now. I saw this little angel. I got upgraded.
Yeah.
and I saw this angel and I was like, seriously? No discussion? Do you know how much energy it took to die? This was kind of a big deal. And the angel, they don't answer questions. She just looked at me and she goes, hi, you're back. Okay. Anyway, as soon as I opened my eyes, that nurse was, I'm lying on the gurney. But now I've got IVs going into me everywhere, and I've got an oxygen mask on, and the nurse gets in my face and she says, "What is your name?" And I said, "Rosemary." And she said, "What year is it?" And I said, 2018. And she said, "Where are you?" And I said, a crummy excuse for an ER. And so I really did. So I think I learned later that I had been gone for more than 10 minutes. And the reason that this is especially remarkable is when you die from bleeding to death, they can't do CPR because that just pushes more blood out. So I actually interviewed a couple emergency room personnel about this. They said the first thing you do is plug the leak, refill the tank, and restart the heart. So the fact that I went more than 10 minutes without any oxygen to the blood is remarkable. So when that nurse asked me those questions, she was trying to affirm that I had not suffered a significant cognitive decline, like, came back absolutely unresponsive. So I was taken by ambulance. It's funny, once you die and they get you back, they want you out of their hospital. So they put me in an ambulance. Yeah, they're like, listen, this could happen again. Get her gone. So they loaded me in another ambulance very quickly. We got lights and siren. It's just a shame you're on your back when they do the lights and siren because that's mighty fun. And we were flying past traffic and people are pulling over. I'm like, this is pretty cool.
It was still cool after that experience you had, because the other one seemed like a different ride.
Oh man, it was a great ride in that ambulance. I was like, okay, because I could only see through the little window at the bottom of the ambulance door. But even with that little bit, I could see the cars peeling off to the right as they were trying to get away from the, loud ambulance. And I was in the hospital for 4 days. And then, there was a lot of stuff that happened. Well, one of the most remarkable things, I mean, it's a 3-hour story. I try to reduce to, 45 minutes. But one of the remarkable things was I knew I was healed. I knew all of it was over. The deep grief, the disease process, all of it was over. And it was kind of sort of maybe funny, ha ha. Because I went back to my oncologist, the one who had done the surgery, and I said, good news, I was healed in heaven. I don't need to have the chemo and the radiation. And he did not. Actually, he wrote mentally ill on my chart.
Well, so what happened?
Because they do that patient portal thing now where they put your chart online and you go in, and I looked at it and it said mentally ill. I'm like, okay.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. And what happened was I had to travel about 50 miles to another part of the state to find another oncologist because, to be blunt, I wanted to affirm that this was gone. And I did find another oncologist, and she did a comprehensive biopsy. And when I say comprehensive, I mean she checked lots of little places inside. I mean, it was a 3-hour surgery. and pulled flesh from all kinds of places and said, yeah, whatever was there is gone. She said, not only is there not one cell of cancer present, in these areas we've checked, she said, but your flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect. I wouldn't believe you ever had cancer had I not seen the original test from the original doctor.
What?
So it was a very dramatic healing. Very
How long
dramatic.
was this after that experience? When did you get this test?
My surgery that, took me to the afterlife was September 5th. And because I had bled to death, they wanted to wait 2 months before they would do a subsequent surgery. So it was 2 months later that I had the second biopsy,
Yeah,
a surgical
nevertheless.
biopsy.
So, did they give any medical explanation? What did she say about that?
Well, because I was flying high at this point. I was going around talking to seriously the Uber driver and the girl at the grocery store, and everyone's like, I was healed in heaven. I died. I had cancer, but when in heaven they told me I'd be healed. I've been healed. I'm fine now. I'm fine, fine, fine. So yeah, I was pretty alive with my story, you know.
Well,
I actually,
I mean, like, because that's miraculous. So what did the medical community say about this though? Because you had stage 2 cancer, and all of a sudden 2 months later, it's gone.
it's
Did they,
gone, yeah.
did
And I
they
mean,
say?
this has been 6 years now, or 5.5 years, so it's been a while. It's funny. The original oncologist, he was a big deal in his field. He was uh he was a big deal. And he called me so much I ended up changing my phone number and said, "You're going to die a horrible death if you don't get in here for treatment." He said, it
Jeez.
was kind of funny because he said, "I understand you're interested in alternative treatments, but I'm here to tell you I've often been called to the bedside of people who try these alternative treatments." And he described in very vivid detail how I would die. And he said it would take about, I think he said it would take about a year and a half to 3 years, depending on how fast things progress. But he described it very horribly and ended with, and then you'll drown in your own fluids.
What is
And
wrong
he
with this
said,
dude?
yeah, well, I mean, and then he called me. I mean, it wasn't him, but his office called me so much. I literally had to change my phone number. And they said, we care about you. We don't want you to die. Come in here for the chemotherapy. Come in here for the chemotherapy. And on and on and on and on and on. But when I got to that second oncologist, the one I had to drive, I don't know, 50 or 60 miles to see, she was she was pretty nervous about even taking me as a patient. One, because I bled to death from the first biopsy, and second, because she was not sure of what she thought about all this. And yet, it was really very dear. So it was a 3-hour biopsy she did. I mean, she sliced me open and, took a little bit from here and there, every place that could even possibly be in question. And after the surgery, I remember this because, when you come out of propofol, you're like, oh, what's my name? What happened here?
Yeah, I experienced
And
that with my mom. So I saw that the days and after she was in the hospital, it was like, oh my gosh, she's not here.
yeah, you kind of go to another land for a while with that stuff. But I remember this, but this doctor, this very sweet and somewhat young doctor, shook me awake. And I'm like, oh, and she shook me awake and she said, "You're right. There's nothing there, not one cell." She said, "We checked, here and there and there and here." And she said, "You were right. It's gone." And so she was as happy as almost as happy as I was. And then my friend who'd been waiting for me in the waiting room, he said she burst through the doors, threw her arms around his neck, and said, "She's right. There's nothing there." So I think it made quite an impact on her. I really do. And then
Yeah.
after I came back from this, it only took about 4 or 5 months, and I decided to sell off all my worldly belongings, sell my house, and move to the Midwest so I could watch corn grow. And people laugh at that, but that's legit. I love watching things grow because I feel like, and I've talked about this, but it's true. I feel like, have you ever looked at planting anything? The seeds, they just get, trounced right into the soil, but then they grow into something so beautiful out of something so bad. And I felt like that was such a beautiful allegory of my life. My husband had been a successful professional, and I'd been a writer with some success. And we were this power couple in town. And we had these big parties. We had these nice parties at our home and had all kinds of important, fancy people come to our parties. Do you know, after his death, they all went away. And who came into my life was my friends, my old friends from my prior life, who were what the world would describe as working class and middle class. But they were the ones who ran into the fray when the other people were running away. And they're still my friends to this day. But I thought that was pretty interesting. And the other thing I observed, the people who came into the fray, one woman said, I started living out of my car because I lost my mind. Somebody living out of their car, they're messed up, if they have resources, but the car felt very cocoonish. And, it had a nice stereo system, sunroof, and heated seats, so it had that going
There
for
you
it.
go.
But
But the timing of this is before the experience. This is before.
Yes, I was living out of my car before my NDE. After my husband's death, before my NDE, that was a 29-month period. But this woman found out that I was doing that, and she said, "This is not happening. You're coming home with me." I said, "No." Her name was Tracy. I said, "No, I'm not. Not coming home with you. I have nightmares. I scream through the night. I can't eat. I'd lost about 35 pounds. I said, I can't swallow food, blah, blah, blah." She said, "No, you're coming home with me." So she took me into her home for 4 months and took care of me for 4 months. So, I know my podcasts get a lot of views, and I believe they're a blessing to people, and I'm really grateful for that. But I feel like the people who stayed with me when it looked like all hope was lost, I wish they got the emails. I wish somebody could write them and say, when she looked like she was a lost cause, you got right in there and said, we're not going to lose you, Rosemary.
Amen.
And I just wish they could get the accolades, I really do. Because they were the ones who saved me.
You're giving it to them now.
I
That's
hope.
amazing. I know you are. I mean, by just shouting them out right now, I think, and I feel like there's people that do that. They don't even care about the shout out of those emails. They were there for an unconditional reason. That's a blessing to have in your life. So that's amazing. You acknowledge that. You didn't let it go by the wayside. You know what I mean? So
they did a lot.
So let me ask you about, there's a lot there. First of all, it's like you got healed from cancer after your other dictionary. First of all, that's something that I'm curious people are going to say about that, because you're here, like, it's undeniable. That's miraculous in itself. But I'm curious about that experience that you had, because a couple of things you said in regards to when you were getting more distant and kind of going through this dark void, if you will. And you felt that you were still you with your macabre humor and this or that, but then you mentioned how we're stripped of our personality and that mask.
Our earthly persona.
Earthly persona. So that's different than what you were saying. Like, you're still you, but your earthly persona is gone. Those are two different things.
I'd always had a problem with anxiety, but if you're not scared of stuff, you're not paying attention to life, I think, but whatever. Yeah. But in this experience, I thought, what did I leave on that gurney? Because I'm feeling really good right now. And I thought I left behind the fear, the anxiety, the worries, the woe, the grief, the regret, the guilt, the overwhelming self-condemnation. That's what I left behind on the gurney. And I remember thinking, I've always wondered what I would look like, what Rosemary would look like, or me would look like, with none of that anxiety and fear and panic and worry and woe and guilt and blah, blah, blah. I thought, this is great. I like this a lot. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I say personality, we think this stuff is bonded to us, all these negative attributes. And I get so mad. Today I got so mad at myself. I had a doctor's appointment, and I'm terrified of doctors. And maybe it's because they killed me. I don't know, but I'm really,
I am really sending you away bleeding to death. I gotta understand why you wouldn't be cool with doctors anymore.
So I had this monster mega panic attack over going to the doctor. And I think, you've had an NDE, you're better than this. You should not be having this kind of anxiety. But I still struggle with it. And, these emails are so cute. These emails I get, people think that I'm some ascended master. And I'm like, if they could see me pacing in the parking lot outside my dentist office because I feel like I'm going to throw up from the fear, they would realize I'm not this enlightened one.
Yeah, I'd love to see people go from typing the email to you in the parking lot. What the fuck is this? You're Rosemary? You sure? You talk to beings on the other side. They told you this and that, but you're what?
It's true.
No, I believe. I believe that, because it's like, if everything you've explained to me, that's that, but this is this. They're two completely different.
Yeah.
Places.
They
you shed
are.
you shed the BS over there, but then you kind of contracted the BS, like there's that earthly weight, if you will, the earthly feathers or whatnot. But so okay, we talked about, you just mentioned the discussion about the medical the personality and persona question. But do you think there's any correlation with what you saw and what you believed in? Like, do you think there's anything there? Because I've listened to some NDEs. I wonder if there's some. Is there any correlation with what you saw there? Because you didn't go through the door, right? So I feel like you got a very powerful glimpse of what's next, but you didn't enter that whatever the heck was next. So
Right.
you have any idea what's next? But actually, sorry, these angels or spirits, if you will, that you experienced, do you think that had any ties to what you believed here on the earthly realm, or is that what it is? Because I'm curious of the relationship between people that have different beliefs here, and then they have that experience. Is everyone seeing the same thing or calling it the same thing, or is the different experiences per belief?
One of the first thoughts when I was being loaded into that ambulance to go to a real trauma center, one of the first thoughts I had was, I've just had an NDE and it is nothing like what I read about. I mean, nothing. I didn't get chimes. I didn't get wildflowers. I didn't get a tunnel. I didn't see dead relatives. I didn't see any of them. And I kind of wonder, don't know. I kind of wonder if that experience when I went from floating to being on my feet and have no memory of the transition, I wonder if there's something happened there that, they say, okay, you're not going to remember this one. I don't know. But I think as to my pre-existing belief system, having read about so many NDEs, I was already kind of a heretic in my church, not kind of hardcore heretic, because I did not take the party line, and that didn't set well with people. By the way, did you know what the word heretic means? Now means somebody who doesn't go along with the church in the way the church thinks they should be going along with. But the etymology of the word heretic is choose.
Huh.
Isn't that crazy? It's like saying,
it kind of makes sense. It kind of like when I'm looking at how it's taken over here when people call you a heretic, I'm not surprised, but no, I did not know that. It's a very fascinating tidbit of information there.
Isn't it though? So back in the day, we'd say to people, oh, you're a heretic, which means you're thinking, you're asking questions. You're saying, I don't know about this. Let's look into this a little more. So did it align with my belief systems? It actually did not, in terms of the theology in which I'd been brought up. And that didn't go well with a whole nother set of folks. So the family's like, yeah, right, whatever. And the friends are like, are you going to eat your fries or what? And then the church is like, you need to study the Bible more because you've obviously missed the message. And I'm like, you know what? Let's do one-on-one of the Bible. I can quote a lot of the Bible. I have read the Bible multiple times. I've studied the Bible. I've read countless exegeses on the Bible. I know the Bible. And I don't know. It was very frustrating that there's no group that says, we'd like to hear more. Yeah. And that's why the podcast has been such a blessing. And that's why a friend of mine, very helpful friend, he said, write that book, because then the people will seek you out and you will not be doing the pearls before swine thing, where you try to share your story and they say, I don't believe you. And I think one of the things that makes my story unique and special is a lot of people like to say, well, this whole NDE thing is just the brain shutting down. It's just the explosions of the neurons firing and blah, 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 apoxia and lack of oxygen and all that. But I shared the story back in my young, right after it happened, I'm still telling everybody everywhere, everything. And this man who is an intellectual, very educated, erudite kind of fellow, he said, what proof do you have that you really died, that this wasn't just your brain having these firings of the neural pathways? And I said, well, that's an easy one to answer. When I died, I had stage 2 cancer. When I came back, it was gone. That is not neural pathways firing. And I said the second thing, and this is a bigger thing, really. I talk about this in my book a lot, but when I got back home and I had to have somebody live with me for 2 weeks because I was, weak and bleeding to death. Turns out it's a really bad idea for a 59-year-old woman. And there was all manner of expectations of the ensuing health problems that would happen. When you bleed out, your arteries and veins get sticky because they're like trying to stop it, coagulate. And one of the first things the doctors told me is I would have I wasn't out of the woods because they believed a blood clot would pop up somewhere and take out my heart, my brain, or my lungs. And none of that happened. And at times I'd get a little afraid in that hospital because I was on total bed rest, and the angels would talk to me and they'd say, we're adjusting things. You're not going to die again. That's in the past. That's not going to happen again. There's going to be one more time when you die. That's going to be the final time. But yeah, the benefit of writing the book and the podcast, and also some of the NDE groups, is they want to hear the story. And people beat me up a lot over, you just read that book for the money. I did not want to write a book. I actually decided not to write a book. I've written 9 books on architectural history. I know how to write. I used to be a reporter for a local paper, actually the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I used to be a reporter for them. I've written for websites, newspapers, magazines. I used to do ad copy during a particularly low part of my life. There's only so many adjectives in the world. So I've done every kind of writing there is. I did not want to write a book. And then what happened it's funny. It was one of the only, I guess there's maybe 7 or 8 times I told this story live, and I was telling it in a small town in Virginia. And I was telling about right after my husband's suicide, I had lost the ability to swallow. I mean, I just kind of seized up. And so my daughter hauled me off to one of the now care places. And we're at these, or urgent care, whatever you call them. And we're at one of these places, and the doctor comes in, and my daughter's with me, and he's got my thin folder, and he says, "So what's the problem here, ladies?" And my daughter said, "Well, her husband killed himself at their home, and she can't swallow liquids or eat food." And the doctor, who was about my age, in his 50s, he literally goes flailing back with his arms against the wall and goes, oh my gosh, the same thing happened to my Aunt Bertha, and she was never right in the head again. And
great, good news.
I know. And I remember I just kind of collapsed back on the gurney because I'd been sitting on the edge of those horrible little tables they have in those places. And I kind of fell back and I said, let's forget about this. Just give me enough cyanide to finish this deal now. But my daughter, she was, I think she was in her early 30s at the time or less. She kind of, rallied, and she turned to the doctor. She said, "Doctor, are you going to help my mother or not?"
Love that.
And to his credit, he put his arms down and calmed down. He said, "Well, yeah, we can give you some tranquilizers." But so I shared this story at a little town in Virginia, and during question and answer phase, a woman stood up. She said, "You need to write a book." I said, "I'm not writing a book." She said, "You need to write a book because if nothing else, medical professionals don't know how to deal with trauma. We're figuring out kind of sort of how to deal with schizophrenia and bipolar and borderline and all these things. We don't know what to do when an otherwise average person has a trauma that destroys them." And she said, "Please write a book and that will help us." And I was like, ugh. So I did.
Well, I'm glad you did, because again, it is one of those things amongst, I mean, it comes with a lot of trauma, not just NDE experiences. People are ashamed of the ridicule for sharing a story that might make them sound crazy. And then a lot of those stories just get covered up. And then when one comes out, if someone like you is brave enough to speak about it, then you, like you said, you more and more pop out. So that's why I think through the muck, for trying to use that word in a sentence, you get muck, aka get through the assholes of some people that are just like very judgmental. That's really what I meant, if I'm being real about it. It's important to have those discussions and to share stories like this. So it's an honor to hear that. But I do want to ask you, what does this mean to you? Like, what did that experience, what does that mean to you in regards to continually living this life? And what does it mean to you in expectations of what happens after?
That's another really good question. You ask these double questions. Okay, what does it mean to me in terms of living this life and the life after?
Let's start with this life. What is the meaning you pull from that experience to living this life?
When I get really rattled, and I get so rattled and unnerved by life, I cry. It was a funny thing today. I was walking through my house, and I just thought about all the suffering of these people in war zones and all the pain that people go through on this earth. And I just cried. And I was like, I mean, I don't watch the news anymore. It's too much for me. But I just cried when I thought of all the pain in the world. And I know that sounds very out there, but it has made me even more sensitive. And when I get really wrapped around the axle of Earth's problems, like having a fight with somebody you care about, or, I got a letter from the IRS. That's always a fun one.
Oh yeah, those are the best.
They're the best. I have been really stressed because now they won't answer their phone. They say, call us immediately. and you call them and you get, all you get is, all of our lines are busy. We don't know when we'll be able to get your call. Click.
Yeah.
They don't say wait on hold for 6 hours. They just hang up on you. So when I get really wrapped around the axle of some of this stuff, I remember what it felt like to wake up out of that deep dreamless state, in heaven or the next life, and feel like, oh my gosh, that 59 years felt so intense. But I liken it to, if you hear I got 3 daughters, you hear your little girl having a nightmare in the other room, and you go in there and somebody's got to really shake her awake and say, hey, 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 it's okay, wake up. It was just a bad dream. It really felt to me like a heavenly parent shaking me awake and saying, hey, 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 that was a rough one, but it was just a bad dream. It's over now. It's completely over. So when I get really overwhelmed, I remember that feeling that all that 59 years of trial and trauma and heartache and sadness and struggle, man, it was a big pile of nothing that important. And I don't say that lightly, because the number one email I get is from people who've lost a child to suicide. And that's one of the hardest things that can happen to anybody. But I know that when we get out of this life, I really think that those of us who've lost somebody in these hard trauma ways, and you said you'd been through a trauma of that same level of horror, I think we're on the spiritual lesson hardest class available. I don't believe we signed up for this BS. I mean, I think the lessons come as they come to us. I don't think we said, I'll take a suicide, an abandoned parent, some health problems, and give me a daughter with asthma because that's a fun one. I don't think we do that. I think but I think we did say, you know what? I want to grow as much as possible in this life. So I do think we're here for spiritual growth. I do think we're here to love. I do think we're here just to be good, just to be good, and to back off from some of the judgment. I no longer involve myself in politics at all, because one, I think it's just a source of a lot of frustration. And I see people getting so, are you Republican? Or are you liberal? Are you conservative? Are you, this? Or I'm like, it doesn't matter. We're all children of God. We're all just supposed to be loving as much as we can. I don't know. So how has it changed me? It hasn't changed me as much as I thought it would, because I was always a very gentle soul. So it hasn't been this big draconian shift. The biggest thing it did, this near-death experience, it did restore my soul. I was circling the drain because of my husband's death. One of the things that happened after his death, one of the things that made very clear to me, because I blamed myself. I should be dead. I felt so guilty about his death. And he left a note that just added that on. But one of the things that was made very clear to me, that the Bible says, work out your own salvation. I'm trying to work out his. And I realized, even now I think about him sometimes, I think, oh my gosh, blah, blah. And I think, no, 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 that's on him. And I realized somebody told me this took a while to sink in. There was nothing I could have done to make him kill himself, and there was nothing I could have done to stop him from killing himself. And when I see suicide prevention stuff, I just want to go stab somebody in the thigh with a fork. This suicide prevention stuff is so unfair. If you're feeling alone and sad and feeling suicidal, reach out. I want to hear. I'd rather have you over for a cup of tea than lose you to suicide. What does that say to spouses and mothers and fathers? We were there. We were doing everything in our power to help these people, but they're gone. So yeah, one of my great bits of peace was when I felt, and this came after this NDE, my husband is on his own path. That is not my path. And that is not mine to work out. That is his salvation. That is, and by salvation, I mean his to figure out. So yeah, I think we signed up. People have real hard lives. I just think we signed up for the spiritually advanced classes so we could get in as many lessons as possible. And I overstated,
Overstated in general, everything you said, you mean? Or
I mean, like, when I went through the buffet line of how much spiritual growth I'd like to have, I just went way too far for my abilities.
I mean, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, it seems like you're handling it, no?
This has not been an easy life. If I'm coming back as Princess Margaret or, Queen Mary or something, I'm not coming back. First off, we're one and done.
Yeah,
when I'm out of here, this whole reincarnation thing, I don't buy it. I know people love it, but we're in an infinite universe that's expanding. why in the hell would we come back to this dirt ball? As my friend calls it, the spherical insane asylum. Why would anyone come back here?
Yeah, maybe
Anyway,
if there's something better out there, maybe there's also something worse out there. So when we go to that one, I'm like, oh wait, Earth wasn't that bad. So it's all perspective. I have no idea. Regardless, we're gonna find out one day, as everyone says. So I'll just leave it at that.
yes.
In the meantime, I got my podcast. You got your books and podcasts. So this is rock on with that. But that was you're very extremely smart. Clearly, you're very well spoken, and the way you tell stories is hilarious to me, which is fantastic. The way to tell any of these stories, it's very easy to talk to you. So I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I know you don't know who the hell I am, but now maybe you do a little. And I do. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and I'm happy people got a chance to hear your story, because that was a very fun ride. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Of course. So, if there's anything, it's always the worst transition after a topic like this. But if there's anything you want to plug in regards to yourself, is there anything you want to let people know about what you got going on?
Oh, yeah. Well, my website is, what is my website? My website is temporarydeath.com. Because I like to say, I did not have a near-death experience. I had a temporary death experience. Near death is when it looks like something bad's going to happen, but then it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I was good and dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I was seriously dead. Anyway, temporarydeath.com, and that's how people can reach me. I'm sure we'll get a few more emails. But I love every email. I really do. I read them all. But it's and the thing is, if I was making money, I'd hire somebody to go through these emails and craft some loving response. I'm not making that much money. If I hired somebody for $300 a month to answer these emails, where's your profit?
Yeah, then you get more shit. Wow, look, she hired someone. She wrote this book to make money, guys. So just to clarify that.
Oh my God.
It's a whole. I was wondering. I didn't say. I was like, okay. So when people say the prove it, I feel like even after people are going to hear the story saying, oh, you didn't have cancer after your near-death experience. Okay, well, show me the medical documents now. It's like, and then after you show them the medical documents, it's like, let me talk to the doctor. It's just a never-ending cycle of you can show the color blue on your hand, and no matter what if they believe it's red, it doesn't matter what you show them. So at the end of the day, everyone believe what you want to believe. It's all good. We're not here to fight each other. It's just whatever makes you happy. Just get off people's backs for believing something different. That's my thought. So, you're amazing. I really appreciate your time again, and I want to thank you for jumping on Dead Talks. And hopefully, I'm not going to shoot you any. Now I'm never going to shoot you an email again. By the way, you know that. Right?
Well, you have my phone number, so you can text me. Yeah. I answer the phone. I think I told you this. I answer the phone every third Thursday, but I do respond to texts pretty faithfully.
All right, fair. I try not to blow you up there too. I'd love to stay in touch, and I'm really grateful for your time. And we'll be in touch. In the meantime, if you need anything. You have my information. You can email me, because I don't like to respond to everyone. So I have a little different approach. But let's wrap it up there. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Dead Talks. Please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. That'll give you updates as to when we post a new video, more episodes, and more content in general. We are streaming on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and all that. And also find us on Instagram at Dead Talks Podcast or www.deadtalks.net. Thank you so much.